what we do now is do a customer panel, and really appreciate the engagement from our customers who are obviously very busy, A, to come here, but B, also to be happy to sit in front of 100 or so people. So James Baker from Spotless, Aaron and Tom, or Aaron, or just Tom? Just Tom. Tom does all the work on it, right? You just manage, right? And Ben Waterhouse from Coates Hire. So grab some seats, and then after this we're wrapping up. So yeah, we might sort of have a few roving mics going around. Whatever. Yeah, I'll pass this one around. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So maybe just introduce yourselves, just so we know who's who. Yeah. Is that you? Sorry, Ben.
Sure. My name's Ben Waterhouse. I'm the Group Manager of Technology for Coates Hire. So I look after both our application development teams and also our service delivery infrastructure and desktop teams.
Hi, my name's Tom Rudiger. I'm one of the enterprise mobility specialists for Silverchain. I deal with a lot of things, usually enterprise mobility program, but also looking at things like telehealth and also some health innovation work.
I'm James Baker from Spotless.
All right, so turn this on. So what I'll do, I've asked the guys to give me just a couple of slides each, just to give a bit of a profile. So I'll get them to sort of step through that, just so you get a bit of an idea of the business that they're in. And then what we'll then do is I'll ask a couple of questions just about, I guess, some of the challenges they had and some of the things that they've learnt along the way, and then we'll sort of throw it open to the floor to sort of ask any questions. But I mean, the idea of this session is 3 very different profiles actually in terms of where they're at. Some really good stories like where James is at in terms of the efficiencies in deployment, but also some quite challenging ones from Ben that he worked through. And I've asked him to sort of give us the warts and all on that as well, because I want everyone to learn about are we really in prime time? And if we are in prime time, then what do we need to do to make sure we actually have a successful outcome? So I think Ben's got a lot of learnings in that. So step through these slides so you can see your slides there, Tom. So over to you to sort of give a bit of a profile of who Silverchain is.
Thanks, Gerard. So I work for the Silverchain Group. You might not have heard of us. We've got a very small presence here in New South Wales. What we are is we're a national community healthcare provider. We have roughly about 94,000 clients annually. We operate in a few states in Australia, Western Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and South Australia. We basically, what our focus is on is things like domestic care, in-home nursing care, and also a lot of allied health specialists and consultations with clinicians. We've got about 4,000 staff. We've got about 350 volunteers. And one of our big challenges and one of the things that we're very proud of achieving is we deliver over 1.8 million hours of care for people and deliver that into the right home, right time, every single time. Well, most times. It's a little slide of basically where we started. The Silverchain Group is over 110 years old. You can probably see there's a few things that they've basically started off with: horse-drawn buggies, camels, that sort of. The camel's great. I would have loved my nurse to rock up on a camel. That would have been fantastic. But you can see things as well is that the introduction of automobiles was a massive technological leap and a massive game changer for nursing, because we can get access to those nurses out to people a lot faster and a lot more quickly, and that capacity was introduced. So enterprise mobility and specifically smartphones, tablets have actually been a major change for us as well. We've expanded our mobility program over the last few years. We started off in about 2010, 2011 with a few hundred devices. It's gotten up to about 4,000 devices, built up about 2,900 smartphones and about 1,100 tablets. We also use not only are these in the hands of our staff, which you can see as based off of things like registered nurses, domestic care workers. We also put these devices in client homes to deliver telehealth as well. So we're using things like clinician to clinic patient video conferencing. We're also using daily health monitoring and medication prompts to do that. And our devices, we use basically them to deliver conduct basically an average of about 8,800 client visits daily. So it's seeing a lot of clients per day. Android has become our mobile OS of choice. We've basically are 99.9% Android. There's a few execs who just will not give up their iPhones, but apart from that, everyone else has got an Android device. And a staggering amount of 70% of our staff use an Android device as their primary technological engagement. So a lot of these staff, they start at home, they go see their clients, they come back and they finish at home. So they're not coming into bases. They don't have access to desktops and laptops. So they do everything usually through their smartphones or if they've got a tablet. No, it's got a bit of stuff up there. But anyway, one of the things that we've also has forced us to do is we've had to go cloud first and mobile first. So that's basically forced us to do a bit of a shift in how we think about it. One of the things we're also looking into at the moment is we're actually looking into Chromebooks. Main reason for that is tablets have been very widely used, but to get the functionality that our nurses needed, they basically said we want to be able to type easier, so we gave them a keyboard. They want to be able to point easier, gave them a mouse. It starts becoming a quite expensive and very difficult solution to maintain. With the announcement of Android apps running on Chromebooks back in I/O last year, we got a bit twitchy and a bit excited because we're looking at these devices. They've got very high capacity. They've got a very low procurement, and basically they're the tablet package that we can use with those accessories that we're bolting on. So we're currently running a few small-scale pilots on that. Feedback is usually pretty positive so far. There's been a few glitches, but apart from that, it's going pretty well. And yeah, this is just some images of our staff using them, especially using the Android apps. That's been a big plus for us. And yeah, as you can see, a few quotes about how our staff really are finding them very useful. And we are going to be looking at rolling out those very hopefully in the future.
Well, thank you. And we'll keep going along and do the bios first, and we'll come back to some questions. So James, thank you.
So again, I'm working across our ITU and sector within Spotless. So on the next slide, this is generally across that middle tier of the utility sector. So the UASG and Skill Tech and A. Smith groups is where I focus the next few slides. But we do also do MDM deployments across the other sectors of Spotless, but these are our brands. So just across those deployments, we're focusing on our range of like environments that these devices are finally. Space deployment and also looking at our users that are and utilising these devices quite and for many hundreds of times a day for and predefined and set up for less common use. So we can move to the next slide. Just talking about some of the types of tablets and devices that we've previously rolled out and across different parts of the business, which generally speaks to, for itself in terms of devices. But recently, our deployment of the setup of the work managed devices was a large improvement on of our ability to be able to hold the deployment. Generally why we've ended up in all the strengths where we're in the Android and platform being around our single point of workforce applications. We're now getting points of contact from all parts of the business, and those can come from either the client or from our operational safety areas, and we're and building devices quite
and go back to Ben. I was going to just quickly jump in here to the email you sent me. Just, but maybe just start to do a bit of an intro while I pull up the rights.
I was going to remember what I put on the slides.
Yeah.
It's only this
Yeah.
morning. For the record, I don't think you told me there was going to be 100 people here either. So that was a little bit of a surprise. So as I said, my name's Ben. I work at Coates Hire. So we're probably at a slightly different phase of our journey from a mobility perspective. In terms of Coates Hire, some of you may or may not have heard of us. You've probably seen road barriers on the side of the road and portable toilets potentially. It's usually the most common site. We're an equipment rental company. In fact, we're Australia's largest equipment rental company. We've got, give or take, about 2,200 staff and probably about 180 odd locations around Australia, depending on what you define as a location. If I did I miss anything on that slide?
No.
I don't know. I'm looking a second. It's going to come up.
It's coming up in a second.
There we go. So we've got and have for a little while had a bunch of in-house developed mobile applications, mainly to support line of business stuff. So barcoding, stock taking, returning of equipment. You know, your sort of standard stuff. Historically, we probably 8 years ago, relied heavily on Windows CE ruggedized mobile data terminals. You know, back in the days where a mobile device wasn't a smartphone, it was something you could throw across the room and it would still survive. With the phase out of Windows CE, we had a real burning platform to change that. So we had this sort of split brain. We had some executives and sales staff with smartphones, primarily iOS devices, but some Android devices. And we had all these about 1,200 odd mobile data terminals that were never going to break because that's how they were built, but they were basically useless due to the operating system on them. So we had this lovely burning platform. We re-platformed all of our applications on Xamarin. I was glad to hear someone else was using that. Fantastic development platform. I couldn't recommend it enough. And Android was the sort of target OS of choice. Whilst we do cross-compile everything to maintain portability, Android was our targeted choice, primarily due to cost of devices. So our initial target was sort of about 900 devices as in the initial wave, and the device chosen was a Telstra ToughMax. It was a ZTE device. It's provided by our carrier, ticked all the boxes, and we kind of modelled the configuration of those very much around how the MDTs were configured. We treated them very separately to our smartphone fleet. You know, long story short, it didn't work. It didn't last very long. Whilst it ticked all the boxes and it was kind of easy to manage because they were locked down, you couldn't do anything with them. Very quickly, we had to start unlocking things and people wanted to start using them as a mobile phone. Who would have thought? You know, SMS, who would have thought? So we had to kind of rethink. And then around the same time, we sort of go to Android Rollout Mark II. So that was Mark 1. Android Rollout Mark II was, we needed to roll out a whole lot of additional devices, about another 700, because we'd built some new applications. So a new chunk of our workforce needed those applications. We were also changing telcos at the time, just to really kind of make things fun. So with that came a change in MDM platform, also just to add some fun to the mix. And we had to pick a new device. We picked a Samsung J3, and we'll probably come back and talk about that later on. And we had all these ideas in mind. We knew what we wanted to fix. We wanted to change how we configured it. And we wanted to move away from using private APNs to a more carrier agnostic network connection, like a VPN. We really wanted to move to an over-the-air rollout so that we weren't touching every device. I had service delivery teams touching every single device before it went out. It didn't work either. We ended up rolling out about 200 Samsung J3s. It was about 40 minutes per device to roll it out. And then we moved on to to Android Rollout Mark III. Now this is where the success starts to come in. So we recognized we had a problem and probably the coming of the mind. So we ended up with Google, Mobile Iron, our telco, Optus, pretty much on very regular conference calls with all the appropriate people to really get to the bottom of our problems. And look, it was a perfect storm, is all that could be explained. The result of that was picking a new device. One of the key drivers was Android version, so we needed to go to a device that was Android 6 because we really wanted to leverage a lot of the Android for Work features. Someone mentioned NFC bumping, so we are doing that as well as we're using a hashcode enrollment method. So we've got this beautiful scenario where we can roll out both from a pre-stage scenario from our telco as well as do an over-the-air deployment if a device needs to get reassigned. We've got much better control around how we lock things down, and we can now actually push an application out and it upgrades itself without the user having to click 10 buttons. That's where we're at now. The first, what did I say to you earlier? About 250 have been shipped, and we're shipping about 100 a day at the moment.
So it just started last week, so perfect timing. Yeah. Thank you for organising that just before our bootcamp.
Well, we tried. We tried.
Took us a few months to get there. We'll actually look probably 3 projects to get there. Well, it looks a bit.
Did we even found a few bugs, I believe.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. And I think one thing that's a really good overview, but I think maybe starting with you, Ben, is what we want to call out there is a journey that Coatside have gone through, a big transformation coming off another platform, going through, as you said, the perfect storm, change of telco, change of MDM, change of device, change of platform, change of way of enrolling, right? Going from legacy modes of enrollment into the Android Enterprise. So things didn't go smoothly early on. And I think one thing I really appreciated was being involved in a situation in that scenario where everyone was at a round table. Google, the MDM with Mobile Line, up to the managing director for Australia was on that call. Senior guys at Optus moving the strings because there's some certain commercial boundaries that need to be moved to actually address some of these challenges. Going from a J3 to an A5 is not an insignificant scenario.
I mean, that's
so there were
double the cost in device, effectively.
Double the cost, right? But at the end of the day, we were all as solution partners are working towards, I guess, helping Ben get to the right outcome, which was, resolving all these challenges and working together as a partnership on that. So I think we can sort of delve a bit more into some of those challenges, but the final outcome is, as you mentioned, you'll eventually have a fleet of all A5.
Look, that's the plan. So we've got our legacy fleet and we've got our new fleet. Now we made a very definitive decision, and I think you assisted with this, which is we're going to treat them differently rather than try and treat them the same and manage them the same. We can't. We're managing them differently, and that has an overhead from an end user computing management perspective, but it allows us to do a lot of the new stuff we want to do with the A5s and Android for work, and then deal with kind of the mess in a standalone fashion. And we've got a plan to basically progressively roll that out. So we put 2-year life on devices, and most of them are getting close to that. So we're just sort of accelerating the time frame, hopefully, to replace them. I think I mentioned to you earlier, we actually did an application upgrade over the weekend as part of our monthly release. And it was the first time in a while that I had several members of the team come up and go, hey, this Google stuff works. It's cool. The application's all rolled out, and we had lots of other deployment problems, but the Android for Work piece was working beautifully. It was seamless, and compared to some of our pre-Android for Work and iOS challenges that we were having post that release.
Yeah, that's good. And no one picked up Ben on the dollar for the swear jar for saying Android for Work, because he wasn't here earlier, so he doesn't know about the rules for today. So Android Enterprise, but anyway.
Oh, my bad, sorry.
No, but I think great points there, right?
I need to talk to Mobile Line about that. I'm pretty sure it still says
in the documentation. That's right. Some of our APIs as well. We have to get the developers onto that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So. But just before we move on to Tom, what would you say some of the key learnings with that were? What if you had your time again and you're at the phase 1 of the project or even phase 2, what would you have done differently?
Look, I probably summarised most of it on this slide, and I'm happy to talk in more detail to anyone if you want more information. But don't rush it. We will put in a time pressure scenario, but don't rush your device selection. It's the devil is in the detail. Like it's all the small permutations. For example, we had a challenge. We don't have Wi-Fi in all of our locations for various reasons, so we needed to do over-the-air stuff over mobile. You think that would be easy, but that actually places a whole lot of constraints on potential devices and other methods. Another one was test. I'm from a development background, so I'm used to testing, but this was at a whole nother level. For example, in our first batch of test devices that went out last week, no one thought to test SMS. Don't know why. It's a mobile phone. We just assumed it would work. Didn't. We had to actually manually push the application down because of the way the enrollment process now works. It's stuff like that you just catch, and you need to test all those combinations. That's probably the biggest lesson learned.
Yep. Cool. Now, Tom. Maybe moving along to sort of, you mentioned a little bit about your journey towards mobile devices and, the growth up to sort of several thousand Android devices. I mean, what are some things you've learned about using Android and some of the sort of best practices you've implemented? Because there's pretty much you and lots of devices. And I know that I've worked with you a long time. People were sort of amazed that one guy can sort of just manage a whole environment so large, right? What are some things you've done, and like what's some of the power of the platform and the MDM technology you're using that sort of helped you achieve that scale?
Yeah, for us, MDM, I mean, it's critical. Like, we were actually at a decision point early on in our Android path where there was a point where someone just suggested, hey, we don't need this MDM stuff. It's it's unnecessary. And I just looked at them like they were insane. For us, we've got 87 sites spread across the country, 4,000 employees spread over that. We can't have IT in every single base in the country. It's just almost impossible. I mean, you could if you had manpower, budget that was sort of like horrendous. But for us, what we've done with our MDM is to make things a bit easier for us. We leveraged a lot of the remote control APIs that exist in things like Android devices. It allowed us to keep our service desk team very centralized, but also fairly small, and was actually able to allow us to upskill our current service desk team so that they could actually not only support our existing laptop and desktop environment, but also be able to easily support the service desk inquiries level 1, level 2 for mobile devices. For us also, we've been using heavily automated app rollouts. We basically, we list, we've got an app store, we have listed what we call mandatory and what we call optional, and those mandatory, we make sure we do regular updates to those internal applications quite regularly. We used to have a huge pain pressure, for example, of our main client management software that would require a very manual update. It was all side-loaded, so the users would download a new APK on a certain date, but then have to enable unknown sources, install, and a lot of those, So a lot of those warnings, our staff are also not very tech savvy. So they see these amazing warnings going, do you want to replace it? You need to activate, all this sort of stuff. And they go, oh, I'm not so sure. And we'd see every day, I used to remember when we did this update, there'd be like the night before and the day things, we'd just be sitting there going, it's going to be a nightmare because it's going to be every single nurse in the country is going to be calling us going, why do I have to do this update? I can't log on. I can't do my job because it would require you to update. What we did, we took the MDM and we basically just said, right, no one's allowed to roll those out anymore. We're going to block unknown sources across the fleet and basically just say, you now get this pushed out by the MDM. And we've seen the service desk hit on that drop dramatically since we introduced that. And that's been good. And it also helps us plug a few security holes by making sure that unknown sources is not allowed.
Yeah, so, and you're still on a journey here, Tom, with your Android Enterprise sort of implementation. So, but one of the things we mentioned earlier in the day was, some of the challenges of not having a Google account, and you also went through, I guess, an MDM change from one platform to the other. But maybe if you can just sort of talk about some real life issues of, if you don't have a Google account on the device, then what sort of limitations does that introduce to you, and what sort of additional workload did that sort of create for you?
Not having Google accounts has made things particularly tricky. One of the always things is, of course, is that, if you want to have an APK available that you haven't developed yourself, you need to get permission from the developer. We've had some pretty good experiences. There was one case where we used a fire alert application that was being developed in WA by this lone developer. We contacted him and said, hey, can we have your APK and put it on our store? And he goes, yes, because you guys took care of my dad and I'd be love to. And he actually wanted to work with us and, build it and make it a better app and actually work with that. That was great. However, on the flip side, we've had developers that have basically just said, get it from the Play Store. So, that's mean it said, okay, well, then we have that problem. So for us, we are very heavily looking into, actually, we've got the Google Cloud Directory Services Synchronization. I think that's changed its name now, hasn't it?
Google Cloud Directory Sync?
That's the one.
So in a sense of which identity model, they're going down the path of silverchain.org.au, mainly because there's potential other Google services like Chromebooks. Tom, as I mentioned earlier, set that up himself, got all the sync working. So there are, my name at silverchain.org.au users sitting in there and they sync to your SSO, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So instead of using Google's own SSO, we had our own investment in Microsoft's ADFS, and we were able to, with the help of the Google team, be able to figure out how to leverage that so that we're not having to basically recreate the wheel and have two separate things. So it actually integrates pretty well. Sort of you can have your cake and eat it too, I guess.
I guess one of the things there to think about is you've got a very broad environment, right? Not every device is going to be on Android Enterprise tomorrow, but you've got a wide range of devices that are going to need to use these accounts for various things, including the Chrome, right? So that directory, if you look at it, is not just an identity for Android devices and for Android devices that are on 5 and later. It's a directory that can be used for other Google services. So going back to the slides I made, when you're making your choices about which identity model, it's not just purely, I need to deploy this device, I need a Google account. just think about what you're going to use that Google account for. And I think the Silverchain example is a good example of where other directories of users that have got these sort of attributes are actually of a benefit.
So yeah, for us, like I said, it would be able to, leverage our own internal things, because like obviously the worst thing you can have for an organization is having to I want to introduce this, which requires major infrastructure change, and it automatically puts everyone on the brakes and going, we don't want to do that. So yeah, and it has leveraged up. I mean, the main reason we started on this journey was not only to make our, app store a bit more easily manageable and be able to get into this Android enterprise thing, but again, yeah, we're quite interested in those Chromebooks and seeing what opportunities they can offer for our business.
Perfect. So thanks for that, Tom. And so, James, we touched on it a couple of times throughout the day, but I think from a deployment point of view, I think where that sort of was quite interesting was that Google aren't always out there talking to customers directly. We rely on that channel to talk to us, and with all the work we've been doing with Panasonic, it was actually Christian from Panasonic who basically gave me a call and said, hey, talking to Spotless, they're having these challenges. We're really keen to get the new Panasonic devices out there, but they're just having real big problems provisioning the device. And so what can you do? It's like, okay, what device is it? What version of Android is on it? Is it going to a later version soon? Which version of MDM are you on? Where's that MDM hosted? Is there an opportunity to get that MDM to a later version? What are the processes you're going through today? What apps do you need to deploy? What are the use case scenarios? So we work profile device owner. Lots of questions we had to ask, right? So it was really good to sort of get involved in that sort of conversation with James, and he sent us back loads of information, gave us all this sort of information we need to know about all those different business units in the organisation. These were going into, the Panasonics were going out to the utility people that were reading power meters, like the smart meters. But that was the first project, but there was a broader set of devices required down the track, so we had to work out how do we cover the right identity model and the right provisioning model and the right use case for those different organisation units. So we spent quite a few weeks going through that backwards and forwards. I had a couple of meetings face-to-face with James. We talked a lot to Panasonic. We talked to AirWatch to make sure that we talked to Telstra to see when the version of TMDM was going up to the right version to support some of these sort of features. So a lot of investigation there, but again, similar to the code scenario, everyone in a round table getting involved in here. The OEM talking to Google to say, I want to get the best out of my device because it's running Android. Google, how can we do this? And we've got AirWatch as a tool. How do we best configure that to meet these requirements? So, so James, your perspective on where you're at before we were engaged and the sort of problems that you were sort of talking to Christian about versus where you're at today. Can you sort of contrast that journey from the pain points you had to where you're at today and the success you had with rollouts?
Yeah, definitely getting all parties together.
Yeah, and you're looking to have, I think you've done the first 200 of those devices. You're going to have about 400 of the Panasonic FZN ones out there over the next couple of months, and then you've got those other business units to work through, but you're pretty much going to use the same sort of deployment methodologies for those, along with a potential for, you've got some BYO stuff in there in one of the business units, a smaller number of devices, but you'll support maybe the work profile for those as well, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an area that we're looking into next. But we've just launched the first 200 devices in there, so the support's there at the moment, and we're reviewing those other areas to be able to do that scale across them because the deployment method is just so much faster and more efficient on like our resources and gives us more time to be applying ourselves to the tasks that we need to be rather than where we were historically in the device management and setup.
Yeah, so I think Travis, one of your colleagues, made the point about like how much more efficient they were and that they didn't have to worry about so much the build time and could spend that productivity on something else that was more useful than sitting there doing next on a device, right? So absolutely a big saving, right? Not just saving cost, but the opportunity to improve the investment and get a better result doing something more productive, right? So I might just open it now to the floor, and we've got half an hour to sort of run through. So anyone sort of put their hand up and ask a question from any of the gentlemen here.
Got a couple from the Q&A I can kick off with, and then if someone wants to jump in. So for Tom from Silverchain.
Silverchain.
I wish I was from Silverchain. That'd be awesome.
He'll do his Daniel John's presentation later
I didn't even grow up with Silverchain. I don't know why. My wife loves them. And yeah, she likes that guy, so that's probably why I know that. Yeah. Why was the change to a different MDM vendor so complicated? What were the tricky elements?
Great question. The major two things that caused us problems with that was obviously our geographical distribution. For us, we've got, like I said, mentioned before, we've got about nearly 90 sites, and those are ranging from, they could be in your Perth or SA or New South Wales metropolitan to all the way up in the Kimberley. So for us, just going, hey, bring all your devices back to base, we'll put the new MDM on it and then put it back out again, was simply just not an option. So for us, we very much had to do an in situ migration. We had to basically get users to unenroll from the existing one, enroll into the new one. It went relatively well. We did have a few hiccups with, some users having some problems, or, users just calling up the service desk and just saying, I don't know how to do this. I don't want to do this. Can you just help me? Which is, fine. But the other thing that also took is just trying to get those users to be able to actually do that in timeframes, because we obviously had a limited time frame due to licensing. And, we've got some employees who might only work one shift a month for us. So, and that person only works on a Sunday evening. So trying to get someone available to be able to do that was a bit of a problem.
Another question for you. How have they found using consumer-based devices versus purpose mobile computers?
I think they actually like it. They really do like the familiarity of it. I mean, we get users who, of course, they object sometimes to the Android platform. They just say, I'm more comfortable with iOS. For us, we just always just say, well, most of our apps are only Android, so you're just going to have to get used to it. But as for the consumer devices, they seem to, the users find them very useful and very easy to use. And for us, we like it as well because sourcing replacements, if we have any issues with any devices, or actually even just sourcing new devices, means the cost of procurement is much lower than if we were going to go with a business-specific model.
Yeah, I know, having worked with you for a while, Tom, one thing you've done well is certainly pick the right devices from the right OEMs that have the good accessories, right? So if you don't have the budget for those purpose-built devices, then the OtterBox or the gumdrop type cases in those sort of things are always good. So it's finding the right accessory partners with those OEMs as well to sort of suit your use cases, right?
Yeah, just the word on the OtterBox case is just finding the right case is often just like an easy thing. You can spend, like, you think, case is going to cost me an extra $50, but that's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars in repair costs. So sort of like thinking about those little things is really worth the effort.
So hearing all your guys' stories is awesome. After kind of getting up on stage and talking about this is where we see everything going and you guys are living that, that's really cool. So from a broader perspective, what do you think Google can do to help you going improve your deployments and then also, get started with new ones?
To me, okay. So I think I'm going to call it Android Enterprise.
Yeah.
Android Enterprise. I think Android Enterprise is come a long way in doing that. What I would like to see is probably, and this is hard, I guess, for Google, is slightly tighter integration from the start. So my challenge at the moment is, and we've got around it, is you've still got to bump the device, or you've still got to use the hashtag. So if someone gets a device, we drop ship from our supplier, they could potentially just take that device and sell it, and we've got little control. So you've got that potential leakage, whereas I've got to use Knox or I don't know, there's another equivalent at the moment to really lock it in from the very start. That would be one thing, and it's probably a very hard challenge to solve. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, to be honest.
So that Ben obviously wasn't here for the earlier parts of the session, but our zero-touch deployment technology is, we have got the answer for that one. So can you think of a harder? Can you think of a harder one for us?
We've got an answer to a question about versioning on what you just said. Probably being more transparent about what versions. So we and we've had lots of detailed conversations about this, but we got really burnt by like point versions and play services needs to be this. And it wasn't easy to find that information. If I didn't have someone to call and go, can you just tell me what I need to do because my team are going X, Y, and Z, I would have been lost. So I got around it because I had a good channel. But,
yes, absolutely.
That was probably my challenge. It was just Android version, Play Services version, Gmail version, deploying it, and then the various combinations of that, and physical device.
Yeah, so I think just to give a bit more detail on that, it's like the version of the device it ships with as to whether it was encrypted or not. So like you might have devices that are running 6 now, but they were a 5 device, they're not encrypted, so you need to encrypt. If you're trying to do device owner, one thing, I'm not sure where it is in our Docker, but it certainly is in the EMM developer guide. It may not end up in our EMM information, but device owner on a device needs to be 6, because on 5, it's the chicken before the egg. The Play Services version is not at the right level.
We kind of got it to work.
So we got it to work, yeah. So you
not very well, but
but you went with 6 devices.
We did in the end.
So you went with 6 devices, right? So there are a few little things like that. These are the things, getting back to planning, getting everyone involved, looking at the documentation, getting your environment analyzed as to what you're trying to do, what version of MDM do I have, what version device, which mode am I trying to deploy, which provisioning method am I using, which identity model am I using.
Yeah.
All of those things add up. And I think one thing we did mention, Ben, for you was you were originally on the managed Google account, so you had a lot of your private apps were sitting inside of locked to coatshire.com.au.
Yep.
And we had to go through a process to say we're now moving towards managed Play accounts. We actually had to migrate all those apps out into new set of apps that were connected to a different organisation, being the managed Play organisation. So these are all things that come out with planning and sitting down and asking the right partners in the room the right questions, I guess. And we sort of managed to get through that. But the earlier we had engaged in that, probably the quicker we could have got onto some of those things, perhaps.
I agree, and that's probably the biggest help would be having that clear picture to start with, because we wouldn't have made a bunch of the decisions we made if we'd known, but we didn't know until we got there, and that's probably just as much on our organisation and the teams involved. But